What a pity. France cannot sell its wines. The UK too is struggling to move its goods. Brexit has limited London's options. So Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is pushing for trade deals. His government is pursuing one with India. It hasn't happened yet. The negotiations are still on. But the proposal has already run into controversy in London. An old ghost has come back to haunt Rishi Sunak. His family links to India's tech powerhouse Infosys. So what is this row about? Visas. They are an important part of any trade deal. The India-UK Free Trade Pact is no different. Visas are a major point of discussion. India wants more visas from the UK, especially for the workers in the information technology or IT sector. That's the ask from New Delhi. If London accepts, then Infosys could be a big beneficiary. It is one of the leading applicants for UK visas. In 2019, the company applied for 2,500 visas. That number will shoot up dramatically if London lifts curbs and makes it easier for Indians to apply. The Labour Party does not like the idea. They're the opposition. They want Rishi Sunak to sit out of the negotiations. Listen to what a Labour MP said, and I'm quoting, "As the Prime Minister recently learned, it's important he declares any interests properly. I expect him to do so in respect of the India trade deal too." And what are these interests? Well, this is not about Rishi Sunak. It's really about his wife, Akshata Murthy. She's the daughter of N.R. Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys. Now, Akshata Murthy is a shareholder in Infosys. She owns 0.9% of the company, but she's not an employee of Infosys. Neither does she hold a management title or dictate business decisions. And yet, her links to Infosys keep triggering controversies around the Prime Minister. These questions were raised last year too, in March 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine. Rishi Sunak took a tough position against the Kremlin. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer then, the UK's finance minister basically, and he slapped tough sanctions. He even asked British companies to pull out of Russia. A host of them complied. They pulled out of Russia, but the opposition highlighted the case of Infosys. Apparently, it was still operating in Russia. And many British politicians did not like that. It's a bit perplexing, really. But that's politics for you. Infosys is an Indian company. It is subjected to Indian laws. And yet, it was being asked to follow British sanctions on Russia. You could blame it on the colonial hangover, but it did blow up into a major issue. Akshata Murthy was accused of collecting what her critics called blood money. That's a reference to the dividend Murthy gets as a shareholder in the company. There was another row over Murthy's non-domicile status. And what is that? It's a special designation, really. If you are a resident of the UK, but you have your permanent home outside the country, you can avoid paying regular British taxes. Akshata Murthy is a citizen of India, so she did not have to pay British taxes. Last year, she decided to pay voluntarily. That's when the issue subsided. But this situation is very different. The trade talks with India have resurrected this story. Infosys does a lot of business in the UK. It has contracts with the British government. It works with companies like Palantir. It's a software company. It works with the UK's healthcare system, the National Health Service or NHS. So you get the idea. Infosys is a well-established brand in the UK, and a trade deal between London and New Delhi could benefit both sides. But it would also put Rishi Sunak under an intense spotlight. So will he sit out of the negotiations? So far, he has no plans to recuse himself. He is expected to visit India soon for the G20 summit. In New Delhi, he is also expected to meet Prime Minister Modi. Reports say a bilateral is being planned. It could happen on the sidelines of G20. The trade deal could also be on the agenda for those talks. London wants to close this deal as soon as possible. Recently, the British Trade Minister was in India. She met top ministers from the Modi cabinet like Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Again, the focus was on trade. So a deal could be on the cards, and it's been a long time in the making. Sunak's predecessor, Boris Johnson, also pursued the same deal. But India's demands for a flexible visa regime derailed the talks. This time, London appears more likely to give in. But what will this compromise cost Rishi Sunak? The British Prime Minister is on thin ice. Here in India, the government has announced a major decision. Export of parboiled rice will carry a 20% tax, 20% export duty. It's a very consequential decision, but I must say, not a surprising one. Rice prices have reached a 12-year high. Export of most varieties is already curbed. Plus, there are state elections around the corner. So it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when the duty would be announced. Now, just to be clear, this export curb is not about shortages. There is no rice shortage in India, so don't rush to your grocery store. This export curb is about regulating supply. If you increase export duty, the product becomes more expensive abroad. And when that happens, fewer people buy it abroad. So the idea is to reduce exports and increase domestic supply. Hopefully, that will cool down prices. But this decision goes beyond India. It may help reduce prices in our country, but elsewhere, it could trigger a food crisis. And I'm talking about actual shortages now, not inflation, shortages. Let me explain how. India makes up around 40% of total rice exports, 40, the biggest exporter in the world. Parboiled rice is a big part of this basket. Now, what does parboiled mean? This is a variety of rice that is partially pre-cooked. It is boiled in the husk and then dried, hence parboiled. Poorer countries in Africa and Asia depend on this kind of rice because A, it's cheaper, and B, it's rich in fiber and proteins. Other countries also produce this variety, like Pakistan and Thailand. But their exports are more expensive than India's, hence the duty. Traders say this decision will level out the prices. So parboiled rice from India may cost the same as parboiled rice from Thailand or Pakistan. But how would that trigger a crisis? Because it's not just parboiled rice, it's all kinds of rice. India has now imposed export curbs on every variety of rice. Let me show you. First is basmati, the premium variety. India has set a minimum export price for basmati. The shipments must cost at least $1,200 per ton. If not, you cannot export basmati from India. And basmati makes up around 20% of India's exports. The second is parboiled rice. As we mentioned, there's a 20% duty. This variety makes up around 30% of India's exports. The third is non-basmati white rice. Now, this variety has been completely banned, zero exports. It used to make up around 30% of India's rice shipments. And finally, we have broken rice. Again, zero exports. The government imposed a total ban last year. This variety made up 20% of total shipments. So just to recap, around half of India's rice shipments have been banned. The remaining half have restrictions. Things like minimum price and duty. So naturally, the world is worried. And it's not just rice. India has curbed the export of multiple food products in the recent past. Wheat was banned last year, wheat export. Onion has a 40% export duty. And reports say sugar could be next. The government is expected to announce the decision soon. It would be India's first sugar export curb in 7 years. So what explains all these bans and duties? In one word, it's inflation. India's food inflation is in double digits. It was 11.5% in the month of July. That's the highest level in 3 years. And driven by food prices, overall inflation has shot up. It was 7.44% in July. To give you some context, the Reserve Bank of India's tolerance band is 2 to 6%. Ideally, it should be around 4%. 4% inflation is good. How do you achieve that? The RBI can always hike interest rates to bring down inflation, but there's a downside to that. Economic growth will be affected. So far, the RBI has resisted that. Earlier this month, they chose to keep the rates unchanged. The RBI governor explained why. He's playing a waiting game, basically. He's expecting vegetable prices to cool down by September. But what if they don't? What if prices rise despite these export curbs? That is the big risk for India. In fact, it's the risk for all countries. Balancing between rate hikes and growth. That's the tightrope all countries are walking. India is projected to be the fastest growing major economy in 2023. Big players like China are struggling. So now is the time to capitalize. But to do that, inflation must be brought under control. Of course, this is the worst case scenario. In the best case scenario, harvest will be good, the supply will return to normal and prices will cool down. Who knows, maybe even the export curbs will be lifted. But even in this best case scenario, there is a problem. The problem of credibility. When you export 40% of any product, you also have a responsibility. And when it's food, even more so. Such sudden bans and duties will raise questions on India's credibility and its ability to feed the world. And I'm not saying we should sacrifice the domestic market to feed the world. I'm saying we will have to be better prepared. The difference between stable inflation and double-digit inflation cannot be one monsoon, especially when the world's food security depends on it. When will Nawaz Sharif return to Pakistan? It's a question that sums up their politics. Until last year, Sharif was enemy number one. He was living in exile, he was convicted in multiple cases, and his party was boxed into a corner. But all of that is in the past. Now Nawaz Sharif is Pakistan's favorite son. His return is all that anyone can talk about. In fact, his party is trending new hashtags on social media, like hashtag the man who built Pakistan and hashtag the lion returns. I know it's equal parts absurd and funny. Nawaz Sharif can thank the Pakistani army for his possible homecoming. But could there be a last-minute hurdle? I ask because we're getting mixed signals now. Nawaz Sharif's younger brother Shehbaz visited him in London. Both men later addressed the media. Shehbaz says his brother will return in October. Not just that, he also said Nawaz Sharif will face the law. Listen to this.
Nawaz Sharif will return to Pakistan in October and lead our party's election campaign. Nawaz Sharif will undoubtedly face the law after returning to Pakistan.
Ideally, that should settle it. Shehbaz Sharif is the younger brother and ex-Prime Minister. If he says October, it should be October. Well, not so fast. The Sharifs lead the PMLN political party. That's the Nawaz faction of Pakistan Muslim League. PML is Pakistan Muslim League and N stands for Nawaz. Their coalition partner is called the PPP, the Pakistan People's Party. Now, the PPP has a different take on Nawaz Sharif's return. Let me quote what their senior leader said. Nawaz Sharif has no plan to come to Pakistan right now. His health is not good. Shehbaz might have said what he did, but I'm saying he is not well. Even at the last moment, he can get unwell. Almost sounds like a threat. Does the PPP know something that the Sharifs do not? And even if they do, who do we believe? The younger brother or the coalition partner? And this question is a very important one. Shehbaz Sharif has made it clear that he will not be Prime Minister of Pakistan again. He wants Nawaz Sharif to take over. But for that, he must return first. And when he does, a mountain of cases await him. Nawaz Sharif was convicted of corruption in the year 2018. He was banned from holding public office. A lifetime ban. That's what he had. But in 2019, Nawaz Sharif traveled to London. He said he needed medical treatment. Apparently, it's a disease that targets convicted politicians. And since then, he's been there in London. Sharif's party members call it an exile, but Pakistan's courts disagree. In 2020, he was declared an absconder and a proclaimed offender. A legal jargon aside, this is a man in trouble. If he returns, the courts could crack down, maybe send him back to jail. His younger brother Shehbaz Sharif did try to prevent this scenario. He passed multiple laws to protect the older brother. One of them would have allowed Nawaz Sharif to appeal against his conviction. Just one problem though. The Supreme Court of Pakistan called this law unconstitutional. They struck it down. So Nawaz Sharif now faces a tough call. If he comes back and gets arrested, it would be a massive blow. He could join Imran Khan in jail. So the Sharifs are looking for a zero-risk situation. They need to be 100% sure that the courts will protect him. Will that happen in October? Well, Shehbaz Sharif was confident, and I'll tell you why he was so confident. Pakistan's current Chief Justice retires by mid-September. He's the same judge who criticized Imran Khan's conviction. He said the trial was defective. And his successor is this man, Justice Qazi Faiz Issa. Many call him an independent-minded judge, but the Sharifs will be thrilled by his elevation. You see, Justice Issa has bad blood with Imran Khan. His government accused this judge of corruption, even launched inquiries against him. But Shehbaz Sharif quashed all of these cases. He said the charges were flimsy and baseless. Maybe that's why Shehbaz Sharif mentioned October. There will be a new Chief Justice by then. Also, the election dates could be officially announced. So more clarity and less risk. For Imran Khan, it's the opposite. All his allies are retiring soon. President Arif Alvi's term is supposed to end in September. There is no word on extending it. The Chief Justice will also retire next month. So time is of the essence. Imran Khan did have some small victories this week. A sedition case against him was quashed by the Balochistan High Court. A murder charge against him was also dropped. But the big case is the Tosha Khana case, the one involving state gifts. The Islamabad High Court has finished hearing the case. The verdict will be out tomorrow. If the conviction is reversed, it would be a big win for Imran Khan. It could also pour water on the Sharif homecoming party. So tomorrow promises to be a big day in Pakistan. Our next story comes from the world of sports. Only a few days ago, young crops like Pragnananda kept the Indian flag flying high at the Chess World Cup in Baku. Now, the golden boy of Indian athletics has scripted history. Yet again, Nira Chopra has clinched the gold medal. This was in the men's javelin throw event at the World Athletics Championships in Budapest. He is the first Indian to win a gold at the prestigious championship. And pardon the analogy, but it's almost as if Chopra is playing Pokemon with medals. This newly crowned champion has won every major title in his sport, including gold at the Olympics, Asian Games and Commonwealth Games. With this, he is on track to become one of India's greatest sporting icons. So what is Neeraj Chopra's story? Here's a report.
If you're an Indian, there's a high chance that you remember this moment. Maybe you even remember yourself glued to a TV screen as Neeraj Chopra threw a javelin with fierce might. With this shot, he had won gold at the Tokyo Olympics 2020 and scripted history. He became only the second Indian to win an individual Olympic gold. The first was Abhinav Bindra in 2008. He won an Olympic gold in shooting, following which India didn't see an Olympic gold for over a decade, till Chopra walked in, stunning the world. And that was no flash in the pan. He has been unstoppable since. The 25-year-old has won every major title in the sport, including gold at the 2016 World Junior Championships, gold at the 2016 South Asian Games, gold at the 2017 Asian Championships, gold at the 2018 Commonwealth Games, gold at the 2018 Asian Games, gold at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, the 2022 Diamond League Trophy, and now the World Championships in Hungary. Chopra has etched his name in history again. He has become the first ever Indian to win a gold at the World Athletics Championships. During his second attempt, he recorded an incredible 88.17 meters. And just as he threw the javelin, he knew that he'd nailed it. He instantly raised his arms to celebrate his win.
इंडिया में बहुत ज़्यादा पोटेंशियल दिख रही है अभी और एक अच्छा लगता है कि लोग एथलेटिक्स को फॉलो कर रहे हैं और एथलेटिक्स स्पोर्ट को इतना लोग देख रहे थे आज पर मैं खुद ये बात नहीं बोलना चाहूंगा मैं अभी और ज़्यादा और काफी कुछ करना है तो उस पे फोकस करेंगे अभी.
His success is a reward for his sheer perseverance. Chopra hails from a village in India's Haryana. Fun fact, he took up javelin at his father's insistence. And the primary motivation was not love for the sport, but to lose weight. Neeraj Chopra, as a kid, had a weakness for junk food. As an 11-year-old, he weighed 90 kgs. 90 is still a magic number, but now it's the distance that he's targeting.
एक कोई दिन पता नहीं वो किस दिन आने वाला है क्योंकि 90 मीटर इतनी उसके क्लोज काफी थ्रो लगा चुका हूं लेकिन आएगा वो दिन कभी ना कभी. मैं उस चीज का कोई प्रेशर नहीं लूंगा. बीच में मैंने थोड़ा सोचा था कि 90 मीटर थ्रो करना है लेकिन सबसे मेन मुझे लगता है कि थ्रो कई बार थ्रो से ज्यादा मेडल होता है.
So what sets Neeraj Chopra apart? Now, javelin is a physical sport. But like any great athlete, Chopra knows that his mind plays a crucial role too. He's known to work on his mental strength, and that helps him to be consistent. His career is laden with records. He collects medals like he's playing a game of Pokemon. He has logged a distance of over 88 meters at least 10 times. along with a throw of over 85 meters 26 times and over 82 meters 37 times. Nira Chopra is now fondly called the golden boy of Indian athletics. And why wouldn't he be? Chopra has become an inspiration for young athletes in India. He has done what no one else could. And he's just 25 years old. The newly crowned champion says throwers don't have a finish line. We could say the same about his talent as well.
Garda, Bled, Lucerne, Annecy. These are four of the most popular lakes in Europe. But have you heard of the continent's famous wine lake? Well, this isn't a real lake. Yet during the early 2000s, Europe found itself sinking into it. Europe, you see, is the biggest producer of wine in the world, and around the year 2005, Europe overdid it. They produced 1.7 billion more bottles of wine than they should have. 1.7 billion extra. Basically, supply exceeded demand, prices of wine started collapsing, and this began the curse of the so-called wine lake. It drowned farmers in losses. About 2 decades have passed since, and now a European nation is whining about its wine again. I'm talking about France. It has enough surplus wine to fill 100 Olympic-sized pools. And now the government will spend $216 million to destroy this extra wine. Ruining so much wine sounds bizarre. So why does France want to do it? Our next report tells you.
They say too much of anything is good for nothing, and that probably checks out, especially if we're talking about the French wine market. It's gone from Merlot to Merde. And why is that? Because France has too much wine. If you think this is an ideal champagne problem to have, think again. The European bloc is the biggest producer of wine worldwide, with Italy, France, and Spain leading the charge. France is the world's second largest producer of wine. It makes over 45 million hectoliters of wine each year. But what's the point of making so much wine if people don't want to drink it? Wine consumption has been declining the world over since 2018. Since last year, wine consumption in France has fallen by 15%, following a trend of reductions across Europe, with 7% in Italy, 10% in Spain, 22% in Germany, and 34% in Portugal. Why is the consumption facing a downer? Let's just say there's a cocktail of problems. People's consumption habits are changing. They're more drawn to beer now. Maybe blame the heat waves for that. Secondly, many parts of the world are facing a cost of living crisis. So does Europe. Inflation in EU countries averaged at 9.2% last year. Prices of energy, water, transport, and food are spiking. So when people can't afford basic amenities, wine is the last thing on someone's mind, even if it helps to drown one's sorrows in it. Another big blow came from the pandemic. It shut bars and restaurants worldwide, causing sales to drop. And while demand is taking a nosedive, production costs are increasing. The war in Ukraine disrupted shipments of products essential for winemaking like fertilizers. Climate change is also hampering French wine. Extreme temperatures are changing harvest schedules, so crops are suffering. And this has given France a terrible hangover. Fall in demand for wine has caused overproduction. Prices have fallen sharply, and farmers are going into losses. Among the worst hit is Bordeaux, which is world famous for its wine. But now most of it is sitting around in French cellars. France has enough surplus wine to fill 100 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So what's the solution? France wants to destroy all this wine. It will cost the country $216 million, but for now, this is the only way to control prices. Most of the money will be used to buy the excess stock, which will be distilled into pure alcohol and used to make sanitizers and perfumes. Some of the money will also go to farmers, so they can switch to other crops like olives. But experts say this idea makes sense only in the short run. The French wine industry needs to take a long, hard look at its consumers and work around their changing consumption patterns. Wine consumption may be dropping, but it's still a strong part of France's identity. After all, French President Macron can't have a meal without it. So his government needs to act fast to make wine relevant again.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Today, that image is of the British airspace. A technical issue affected the UK's air traffic control. As a result, there was chaos. Hundreds of flights to and from the country were grounded. Thousands of passengers were stuck at airports. Many of them still are, in fact. The issue had to deal with flight plans. They give air traffic control important information like where is the aircraft coming from, where is it heading to, and at what time. Usually this information is fed automatically into the system, but for a brief time it had to be done manually. Authorities have not figured out what caused this snag, but the good news is it has been resolved. The US had a similar experience in January. Hundreds of planes were grounded after the Federal Aviation Authority reported a snag. Needless to say, it's a terrible experience for passengers. Their bookings, their travel plans, all of it would have gone for a toss. And over to some striking visuals now. First from Romania. Two massive explosions happened at a fueling station. At least one person has been killed and more than 26 firefighters have been injured. Meanwhile, the Indian Space Research Organization has released new images sent by the Pragyan rover. It came across a crater on the moon's surface. And SpaceX sent a rocket to the International Space Station. It had 4 astronauts on board who have now reached space. We'll show you how the launch went and how the astronauts greeted each other. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." He was one of the most prominent leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States. In the speech, Martin Luther King Jr. said he imagined a future without racism. We're leaving you with that. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
The International Space. So these are our 4 crew members. You can only see the Roscosmos, his first time on board the International Space Station as well. And with that, crew.